Stephanie Dobson is back with us this week. Stephanie is a lawyer and mediator at Henka Divorce Law and Mediation here in Lloydminster. Back for another episode of Healthy Thriving Family After Divorce. So Stephanie, this week we're talking about the first steps when somebody decides or a couple is going to decide they're going to separate, how everything starts. So let's talk exactly about that. Once you have made the decision to separate, what is the first thing to do?
I thought this was an interesting topic this week because, we go into so many different components of family law. And I thought, sometimes that starting point can be, sometimes the most difficult and sometimes the scariest time. So, I acknowledge that people's worlds is changing. There's probably a lot of conflict erupting at home. So I thought that, it's really important to remember that the first step in the separation process can sometimes happen even before that decision to separate has been made. So I thought of a few examples here that as to how people can prepare. So first, it's really important to do some research. So of course, we all know how to do a Google search. So it's very different if you Google something like respectful divorce, positive divorce, or if you search for something like how to keep everything in a divorce or something like that. So, really important to narrow your search. Make sure that when you put in something into Google, put in your province of residence, because as we've talked about lots before, there's differences amongst the provinces. Second, books are a really great way to dig deeper into a subject. So of course, there's thousands of books. So doing specific searches for the types of books that you might be interested in would be really handy. In my e-learning platform, Up a Notch Learning, that we've talked about lots, I've got over 80 book recommendations, which are all nicely organized, divided into categories. And I can tell you, I vouch for every single one of the books. I've read every one of them. Third, find some supportive people. I call this a spectator gallery. So this is where we divide people in our lives into supportive versus toxic people. It's really important that when you're trying to create a group of people around you during your separation is to find those supportive people and use those people to confide in. And lastly is to meet with a divorce professional. So of course, it's really important to get the right information about how things work, what you're allowed to do, not allowed to do, and all of that sort of things, just to get a lay of the land and get you put into the right direction.
So Stephanie, when somebody takes the step of contacting a lawyer in this process, what can they then expect?
We hear all the time that people, when they contact our office, they say, we've never talked to a lawyer before other than when we bought a house. So I understand that this can be very daunting. So here's a few things that you may want to consider when you're making that initial contact. So there's a few different ways that you can contact a law office. Of course, there's the easy thing about making a phone call. There's also looking on the firm website. And on that website, you can get the lawyer's contact information usually, or the office general contact, the email, a contact form, or even some websites have a live chat agent. I always recommend that people contact us through our website because we have a very specific way, as a lot of our viewers know, of how we handle separation and divorce, and it allows people to get a feel for who we are, how we do things. So that contact form, that live chat agent are always the best way to get in touch with us. So when you call into a law office, there's usually a particular person who deals with new client intakes. So make sure you're talking to the right person first. Then you're going to go through a series of questions. So before you just launch into your story, we're going to need to know things like your full name, the other party's full name, a very brief explanation of what's going on for you. And then in our case, we always set up a 5-minute free call with you to make sure, to make sure that we're barking up the right tree, that I'm the right person. And then, of course, next, initial consultation. That's always the next step.
When you get to the step where you're going with the consultation, Stephanie, what happens during that consultation?
Well, of course, I can only describe what happens at our office. Every office is slightly different, but usually it will start with that initial consultation. So I'll just describe for you very briefly how we do things. So before you step foot into our office, we're going to need 3 things from you. First of all, a questionnaire, a valid photo ID, and then sometimes there's some documentation that we need. But for the initial consultation purposes, there's usually very little documentation, maybe a draft separation agreement or some court documents if they've been prepared ahead of time. Then once you get here, I've broken down the consultation into 4 parts. So first, we're going to go through your story. Then we're going to talk about process. Now, for our purposes, most people have decided on process, legal services versus mediation services by the time they get to our office, but we'll make sure that you understand what that all means at the consultation. Next, we're going to make sure that we answer any of your questions. Some people come with their laundry list of questions, and others, questions will come up along the way. And then, of course, before we wrap up, we always talk about next steps to make sure we have that action plan for you.
All right, Stephanie. Well, thank you so much for joining us again this week, and we'll be back to chat with you next week.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey.